So if I say the name Blake Chastain, I'm guessing that probably doesn't mean much to many of you out here at all. He's a podcaster. He is also a book author, and yes, we have our kids going right now. Glad they didn't forget. Blake Chastain, podcaster, author. In 2016, he coined a term that has since gone mainstream, and that's the term evangelical. Evangelical. Ever heard that term? It describes people who grew up in evangelical churches, but who walked away, usually not because they stopped caring about faith, but because they started asking hard questions and they didn't get real answers. I feel really loud. Am I loud to people out here or no? Are we good? Say, I'm just, okay. So I just want to make sure that I'm not blasting you out of the room here. So, evangelicals, people who have doubts about God, about the Bible, about church, or the way the Christians act. And many of them have left the church. That's why they're called evangelicals. It's because they didn't feel like they get answers, or they didn't feel like they get heard. And every person, I suppose, has doubts or has moments in their time when they're like, I'm not sure what I really think here or what I really believe here. But the goal is not to be an evangelical, obviously. The goal is to take our doubts and to somehow work through our faith so that we come out on the other side somewhat stronger. But I share that about a Blake Chastain because I'm not so concerned about the title or the name that he came up with. I'm concerned about him. Or I'm concerned about you or me or the Marcia or the Mary or the John or the Jack or the Joe that has doubts and comes to church with those doubts and doesn't know what to do with those doubts. In all of us, when it comes to faith, I think at some form or another we have doubts. Maybe questions is a better way to say that. They're questions that maybe we've buried, questions that maybe we've kind of just pushed to the back because we don't know what to do with them. Maybe we've avoided them. Maybe we're like, I don't even know what to ask, or I don't know who to ask. Or maybe we've even asked, and we've been kind of disappointed by the pat answers that we got, or somebody just looking at us and saying, well, that's a good question, and not having much beyond that. But when we come to church, or when we come to faith with our doubts, and we don't get answers, there's a threat that's there. And there's a threat that comes through doubt. So the question today is this: can a planted faith survive doubt? Can a planted faith survive doubt? Let's be honest. Faith is hard. And faith is hard, especially when we talked about this a couple weeks ago. It's hard when it collides with disequilibrium, where what we believe says one thing and what we're experiencing in life seems to be contrary to that, and we can't make them measure up. They don't seem to be equalized. And we said we got to go back to the character of God. That's the only option we have there. Last week we talked about how faith is hard when we deal with desolation, which is a Christian term for dryness of the soul. When you're seeking God, but you're not seeming to get much by way of reward or response back. And we said we just have to lean into the presence of God. Well, again, faith collides this week, but this time with doubt. And I think it's maybe the most common that we experience. And I think sometimes it's the most challenging that we experience as well. So how can we grow a faith that's planted deep enough that it can withstand doubt? We're going to look again at the story of Jeremiah. This week, do it a little bit differently. We're going to look at 3 different passages. The first one will be in Jeremiah chapter 1. Jeremiah, as we've said the last couple of weeks, was a prophet of God, served for 40 years. Didn't have much success, as the world would equate success, but he was doing what God wanted him to do in sharing these prophecies and preaching to the nation of Judah. But he seemed to have some moments of doubt. And what we're going to do this morning is look at 3 of these moments of how he experienced doubt, the type of doubt he experienced, and maybe what we can do with that doubt ourselves. But before we go there, let me just make some blanket statements here about doubt. I think that kind of set the foundation for our talk this morning. The first one is this: doubt is not sin. Doubt is not sin. It's not sin to have doubts. It merely sets us up to sin if we don't deal with our doubts appropriately. So doubt is not a sin. So, man, like if you're saying I have my doubts, that's fine. Secondly, doubt is universal. Everyone struggles with it in some way, shape, or form. And the reason we struggle with it is because we're finite people. And we don't know everything, so we have to make guesses on what we don't know. We don't know the future, so we make a guess on that future. But that guess is reflective of our doubt. Thirdly, doubt is an odd but necessary companion to faith. If you don't have doubt, you have certainty. But if you have certainty, you don't really have faith, you just have certainty. So doubt is back in if this is certainty, we have this continuum out here with faith and doubt, and they share the same space. And the goal is to push doubt out as much as we can, but we're never going to get rid of it completely because they coexist. It's an odd but necessary companion to faith. Fourthly, doubt is a point on a path. And the path is this: we start with questions that we have, and when we don't get our questions answered in satisfactory ways, we move over into this area of doubt. And so we wrestle with them on a deeper level, but after that we take one more step. But that next step can go in divergent directions. Some things we take the step of saying, okay, I'm not sure, I've got this doubt here, I'm not sure what to believe, but I think what I've believed in the past, man, that's just totally wrong, so I'm going to go in a completely opposite direction. And we're assuming that the opposite of this wrong would be right, and it's just the opposite, it's not necessarily right. But we go off in the path of assumptions, just assuming that what I think here is different, so it must be good. Or we go off in the path of what I call behavioral change, where we look at something and say, well, this is what I was taught, this is what I believe, but I have my doubts, and I'm going to just try this out and see if it works for me. And even if it works for me intellectually, if I can make sense of this doubt intellectually, and so we go off in a different direction that way. And in those cases, assumptions in our behaviors, we're kind of going in a completely opposite direction. But we can actually go in the same direction we were going with our faith, but we have to be careful with this one, and that's cynicism. I'm not giving up on it, I'm not turning back on it, I'm not walking away from it all, but I'm just kind of standing back and watching the whole thing and going, something's not quite right here. And everything I see, I kind of look at it like with, well, I don't know what I think about that. And we kind of become judgy in the way that we view what's going on in our faith. But there is a fourth option, and that's the one I want to promote today, and that's this: depth. We can pursue depth. We can take doubt and make something of it. We can take doubt and ask this question, okay, I've got this doubt. What am I going to do with it now? And actually, I believe this, that doubt is the entry point to a deeper faith. Meaning this, that if God's going to grow you in your faith, He's likely to use doubt as part of your story. Sometimes we look at doubt and go, oh no, I don't know what to do with this, and so we just kind of throw up our hands and walk away. The invitation here is to look at doubt and say, you know what, I'm going to work through this because it's going to take me to a better place. So if you have some doubts, they definitely come with some potential for good. And that's good for all the people like Blake Chastain or for Brent Wood or for anybody else who's sitting in this audience this morning who struggles with doubt, because we all do. So what are the questions that you have? Maybe it's questions that you have about God. Maybe it's questions that you have about your faith. Maybe it's the questions that you have about your place in the world. And maybe it's instances where you're just not quite sure, like, I don't know if I think that or not, or whether you don't really get something, like, I don't really understand that. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. What are the doubts that you struggle with in your life right now? Can you identify them? Well, let's look at these 3 doubts that Jeremiah had. They may match up with yours perfectly. You might be able to say, well, that's me exactly, or it may not connect with you at all. But there's something, I think, in each one of these that we can take from that will help us deal with our doubts. The first one here is Jeremiah chapter 1. We're going to read in verse number 4. And this is when you doubt God's plan. The word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. And here's where the doubt comes in. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, Jeremiah speaking, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. But the Lord said to me, don't say I'm too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. And he's overwhelmed by this calling, which leads to doubts. He doubts his ability. He doubts his experience. What does he say? I'm too young. He also, I think, doubted the assignment. This wasn't going to be an easy assignment. In fact, if you go on and read the rest of this chapter here, God says it's not going to go well for you here. So he doubts that. And he doubts whether this is a good plan. Because it's going to be hard. And I'm not sure it's something that he would have chosen himself. And so the key question is this: can I really trust God's plan for my life? Can I really trust God's plan for my life? And this is a personal doubt, just you and God. What's going on in your life? And it's like, I don't know. Can I trust you, God? And we look at things and it's like, is this really what you asked me to do? Or God, did I maybe get this wrong because I tried it out and it didn't go quite right? Or God, do I get a say in this? Or I just have to do whatever you say? Like what happens if you send me off to China? Or maybe you want me to go to Nineveh? Or maybe you want me to go to seminary? Or whatever it happens to be. And we have our doubts. Or something's like, really, God, you want me to do something that's that hard, that difficult? Or maybe it's like, why did you let this happen? Or have you forgotten all about me? And we have our personal doubts. Can I really trust God's plan for my life? It's interesting that as Jeremiah expresses his doubts here, he doesn't get scolded by God. In fact, God addressed those doubts even before Jeremiah spoke. But what did he say? If you look back in those verses there, he said, first of all, I formed you. I crafted you. I made you unique, Jeremiah. And not only that, I knew you. In fact, I know you better than you know yourself. And I set you apart. I've chosen you specifically for this task. So you're going to be prepared and adequate and able to handle what it is that I'm asking you to do in this situation. I appointed you. There's a bigger plan here. I am with you. You're not on your own. I will rescue you. You'll be okay. And where Jeremiah shows up and says, God, I think you got the wrong guy. I don't really like this plan. God says, oh, no. I've got the right guy. But stop worrying about you and start looking at who I am. If you look in there, there's 6 different times where God says, here's who I am. And not, here's who you are, Jeremiah. But when we face this question about God's plan, we need a couple things here. We need to recognize the bigger story and that God's still writing this story. And so this sometimes it's like, I don't see how I fit. I don't understand what's going on here. We just need to be assured that God is writing this story, and this story is planned out far enough that God, even at birth with Jeremiah, says, here's how it's going to go. So not only is he writing the story, but he also knows you better than yourself, better than we know ourselves. And what God is saying to Jeremiah is like, hey, you have your doubts about yourself, but hey, don't forget who made you. And if I'm asking you to do something, I know enough about you. And sometimes we're like, hey, I don't get this, God. I have these doubts here. I don't understand my role. God's simply saying, okay, trust me. Because I've made you. I'm writing the story. I've put you in this role, and it's going to be okay. So I would describe these as personal doubts about ourselves and how we relate to God. But then there's doubts also about God and how he relates to the rest of the world. And this is when we doubt God's justice. And the story here is in Jeremiah chapter 12, or the scripture, Jeremiah chapper 12. So I'll give you a second to advance there. When you doubt God's justice, verse number 1 of chapter 12, you are always righteous, Lord, when I bring a case before you. Or so I think. Yet I would speak with you about your justice, and then I have this question. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all the faithless live at ease? You have planted them, and they have taken root, and they grow and bear fruit. You are always on their lips, but far from their hearts. Yet you know me, Lord. You see me, and you test my thoughts about you. And the question here is what? Why do the wicked seem to win? And Jeremiah standing here and says, like, okay, God, I say you're just, and then I look at the world and I'm like, okay, what happened to justice here? Because we see so much injustice in our world, don't we? We see slavery, and we see innocent people caught in civil wars, and we see trafficking, and we see abuse, and we see lawlessness, and we see brutality, and we see racism, and we see prejudice, and we see people being taken advantage of, and we see people being disrespected, and we look at the world and go, there is no justice in this world. And it's easy to come to that conclusion, and that's what Jeremiah is doing. He's saying, hey, I don't get it, God. I don't get it. Don't you see all this? Like, these people are just doing the wrong thing and they just get away with it, and they're prospering too. It's not just that they're getting away with it. Do you care? Are you big enough to act? Or maybe there just isn't a God, because if there is a God, I would hope that he'd be better than what we have right now, right? And that he would do something about this. And where did evil come from anyhow? And we look at these questions like this, and doubt comes into our minds. And this doesn't just have to be theoretical, like, well, I've seen this, or it doesn't have to be like not involving you. It can be personal experiences where you do something, you tried to do the right thing, and it didn't go the right way for you. Something bad happens, and you wonder and doubt, what's God doing here? God, you don't seem to be acting very God-like, at least as how I would describe God as being a God of justice. Can I count on you? I don't even know what you're like. And maybe the doubt even goes so deep, it's like, I don't even know if this is for real. Because if it were for real, it certainly wouldn't be like this, right? And we wrestle with these doubts about God and his sovereignty in the world. But there's more in this passage. If you go back to verse number 2, look at this little phrase here. He says, you are always on their lips, but far from their hearts. Who are the wicked and the faithless that Jeremiah sees as getting away with it? It's the religious. The people who talk about God and live otherwise. The people who God's on their lips, but he's far from their hearts. And sometimes I think it's God, who causes, or we look at God and we don't understand God, and that causes our doubts. I think there's a lot of people, especially in the faith world, that look at Christians or the religious, and that's the cause of their doubt as well. Oftentimes, it's people. It can be religious institutions or teachings or practices. The church would fall into that. And things happen in the church, and maybe it's something in the past where, you asked what you thought was a legitimate question, and you just got a pat answer, and you're like, I wonder if they really have an answer for that. Or maybe it's been something in the church where something happened, and there was abuse or mistreatment or taken advantage of, and nobody seemed to want to deal with it correctly, and you're like, is that what the church is like? And I think there's a lot of people in our world today that are looking at the church, and some of them are still showing up at church, thank goodness, but saying, hey, something's wrong here, because this God that I'm supposed to be following and these people who are supposed to be following God, I look at them and there's this huge disconnect, and I don't really get it. And so can I trust this institution that's causing me trauma or that's been misleading me? And to be honest, I've struggled with this in my own life, and I've shared this on many occasions. I was brought up in a church that practiced legalism. Not for salvation, but legalism in the Christian life. And it's like, if you want to please God, you better make sure you dot every I, cross every T, because God's just up there waiting with a club to bop you if you get out of line. And so all of my Christian life was about performance. And then one day, somebody told me about grace. And I had to look back at everything that I was taught and said, the church taught me this, got me really off track, but I wonder what else they taught me that wasn't right. And what else? And I've had to go through this period, and it's been years now where I've had to keep going back and saying, I wonder. And there's a term that's out there for that right now, and it's called deconstructionism. And it's something that you hear that out there in the Christian world, where people who grew up in the church look at the church and say, something was wrong there. What I was taught, or the people that claimed to be one way, but I saw them in real life and they didn't act that way. And they start to deconstruct this faith. They say, well, I'm going to discard that, I'm going to discard that, I'm going to discard that, and discard that. And they end up backing away from their faith there. So what do we need to do with all this? Well, first of all, take your questions directly to God. And if you have questions, whether it's your personal experience with injustice or whether it's something with the church, don't walk away in despair or frustration. Take your questions directly to God. God's not threatened by those questions. But here's the second thing. I think this is really important. We need to separate what God does from what people do in his name. We need to separate what God does from what people do in his name. Well, then there's a third question. It's beyond the personal doubts about your faith or doubts about the world. This is actually about God himself. And as we look at this passage, we're going to go to the next book there, Lamentations, which was actually written by Jeremiah as well. So Lamentations chapter 3. And Lamentations is a long word for lament. And lament is a spiritual practice, which is on the back of your bulletin this week. So I don't know if you've ever practiced lament. It's a very legitimate religious practice where you can come to God and just kind of lay it all out there and say, okay, God, I don't get it, or God, I'm struggling with this, or God, this is hard, and I don't like this. Actually, I think they say like 60% of the Psalms are laments. But this is Jeremiah's lament in Lamentations chapter 3, verses 1 to 33. I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. He has driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than light. This is the prophet talking here. Verse number 6. He has made me dwell in darkness like those long dead. He has walled me in so I cannot escape. He has weighed me down with chains even when I call out or cry for help. He shuts out my prayer. He has barred my way with blocks of stone. He has made my paths crooked. Things are not going well for Jeremiah here. Jump to verse 14. I became the laughingstock of all my people. They mocked me in song all day long. Think about that. I'm such a joke here that they have made up songs about me. He has filled me with bitter herbs. He has given me gall to drink. He has broken my teeth with gravel. He has trampled me in the dust. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. And so I say, my splendor is gone. All that I had hoped for from the Lord, my hope is gone. I remember my affliction, my wandering, the bitterness, the gall. I remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. And here's the question that Jeremiah is asking right here. Is God still good when life falls apart? Is God still good when life falls apart? Now, Jeremiah isn't at this point debating or doubting God's plan or the injustice in the world. He's actually doubting and questioning God himself. And he's saying, I'm trying to do the right thing and everything is going wrong. And he's lost his hope. But he doesn't stop writing. And he goes on in verse number 21, he says, yet I call this to mind and therefore I have hope. The game is not over. And as we read on here, doubt is not going to win. He says, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those who hope in him, to the one who seeks him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It's good for a man to bear the yoke while he is young. Let him sit alone in silence, for the Lord has laid it on him. Let him bury his face in the dust, there may yet be hope. Let him offer his cheek to the one who is striking him, and let him be filled with disgrace. For no one is cast off by the Lord forever. No one is cast off by the Lord forever. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love. For he doesn't willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone. And he starts to move away from his doubts, and he goes back to the character and the nature and to the goodness of God. And so from this, we take a couple ideas. First of all, the experience of life itself assures us the reality and the goodness of God. The fact that you woke up this morning was a gift of God's goodness to you. There's nothing that requires God to keep any of us alive or to just give us life in the first place, and yet he does. And so the fact that we have life means that God is gracious and God is merciful, and beyond that, we are enjoying so many other blessings too. Because of all these things that are going wrong, I still have a good list of all the things that are still okay in my life. But more importantly, the reality or the goodness of God brings hope, which is really the antidote to doubt more than faith. Sometimes we're like, I have to have more faith to get rid of the doubt. No, I actually need more hope to get rid of the doubt. But if I can look at my life and say, well, look at the goodness that God's brought into my life thus far, I can take that hope as I face the doubt into the future. And so the conclusion here is that doubt isn't really the question, whether it's okay to have doubt or not. We're just going to have it. The question is, what do we do with the doubt that we have? Well, there's basically three options of what you can do with that doubt. The first one is you can deconstruct without reconstructing. In other words, you can start to pick apart all the things you say, well, I don't think that was right, and I don't know if I believe that, and I have my questions about this. And we just start discarding all of these things. But if you discard all those things and never reconstruct and you just walk away, you walk away to hopelessness. You have a second option. You can just accept everything that you're told, and rather than ask questions because you get frustrated because those questions don't get asked, you're just like, okay, I'm just going to accept everything I'm told, and I'm just going to take it all in by faith. I don't think that's a good approach either. Because you don't have a depth to your faith that lets you work through the next question that comes. You've actually learned some bad habits. Where the third option gets past that, and this is what I would encourage us all to do, and that's to question, but without prejudice or without bias. Where we come to a doubt that we say, hey, I have a doubt here, I have a question here. And I'd like to ask that question. And maybe you need to ask that of God, maybe you need to ask this of somebody in the church. Maybe you want to ask me that question, but to come with honest faith, because if we'll work on trying to figure out the questions, that's going to force us to grow deeper. But it's where we take this attitude of, I don't know about this, but by God's grace, I'm going to find out, or I'm going to work it out. So if you're willing to take that last step to say, I'm not going to bail on it, nor am I just going to accept it, like, well, just tell me what to think, but to say, I'm going to have a faith that is actually mine, that I've done the hard work and I've dug through the doubts to get there. Here's just some practical encouragements for you. First of all, your doubt is okay. God's not threatened by it, and He's big enough to handle your big questions. Actually, your faith requires that doubt. And so if you've hit another wall of doubt, there may be an invitation there from God to say, okay, let's get through this so that we can get your doubt or get your faith even deeper than it's been. Secondly, ask honest questions. Somebody I read said this: pushing down your questions is not an act of faith, but of willful ignorance. So if those doubts come, the challenge is like, okay, how do I pursue then? So ask honest questions. Seek out trustworthy sources. The Bible is a good one to start with. But you can talk to people who you have confidence in as far as faith goes. Keep asking those questions. And ask until you get some answers, or till you get to the place where you're like, I don't know what the answer is, but I've worked through this enough to it where maybe all I've got left is faith here. But we just keep going instead of just accepting what somebody says without doing the hard work yourself. But I would also say this: be careful of cynicism. And that's when we start to ask questions and we don't like the answers we get, or we don't like who's giving us the answers, or whatever it happens to be, and we start to become judge, kind of like everything, questioning everything. That's not the point either. The point is an open sincerity that says, I want to learn, so I'm going to ask questions. Christianity requires faith. But I would argue that it's a reasonable faith. I don't think God asks us to suspend reason or rationale. Sometimes we have to say, okay, you're God, you're eternal, you're omniscient, you're all-wise, you're infinite, you know so much more than I do. I'm never going to grasp all that. That's understandable. But I don't think God is in the business of trying to confuse us or to take us down paths that don't make sense. I don't think that's how it works. The third thing I would say here is reject simplistic answers. Sometimes when you come to a question, the answer is easy, but if you have a doubt in a question, it's probably because it's not easy. And sometimes we have to say, it's like, okay, I'm going to keep looking here until we get this. So it can be cloudy. And sometimes we can actually live in the fog. And sometimes I wonder if God's like, I'm not ready to reveal an answer to you yet, because I want you to keep working through this process of digging down in your faith. Now, I would say this: don't reject legitimate answers that you don't like or happen to agree with. Well, I have this question, here's the answer. I don't like that answer because I want to do this. Well, that's not being honest and sincere with your doubt. And be careful about answers that are based on experience. Well, I tried this and this is what happened. That's not really safe either. But be okay with some gray areas, or be okay with some things where like, I'm not sure I've got that figured out, where it keeps forcing you to go back. Well, I'm going to keep looking. Because I don't think God's playing hide and seek, but I think God is wanting us to grow in our faith and pushing us in that direction. Next thing here, don't give up on God, or especially, or don't give up on the church either. The church is the company of the broken, and part of our brokenness is all these doubts that we bring and the questions that we bring. But the church is still God's hope for the world. And I would say this too. If you've been a part of a church and you've been hurt by a church, and so many people have been, or you've been turned off by maybe something in the leadership of that church, whatever, the church, like, they're all connected, and yet they're not all connected. And sometimes people are like, I'm upset at the church, and I want to say, well, which church? Because not every church is the same. No. Are you talking about Waterford Community Church, or are you talking about a church in another town, or another place, another time? And sometimes I think we need to be careful not to lump all churches together. And that doesn't mean that we can't mess things up here too, or that I can't, because I do. I would also say, don't let other people dissuade you. If somebody else had a bad experience at church, it doesn't have to be your bad experience. If somebody else has a doubt, it doesn't have to be yours. So be careful about that. But I would say this, let's be part of the solution. Let's be part of a church where we are constantly going into God's Word and trying to sort out what it actually says, and trying to live out what it says, and trying to live it out on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So if somebody else sees us, they don't say, oh, that's a Christian? I got my questions now. I got my doubts now. And I would say this here at Waterford Community Church, bring your questions to church. That's fine. And we'll try to answer them, and that's what we try to do on Sunday mornings, answer some of your questions. And if we don't answer them here, you can always catch me and say, hey, I got some questions, and I might look at you and go, well, I don't know either. But we'll try to get to the bottom of it as best that we can. But we need to realize then what is at stake. Because if you walk away from church, or if you walk away from faith, or you walk away from God, what are you walking to? You can't walk away from one without walking towards the other. And my question is, if you walk away from the spiritual or walk away from the faith, you're walking away from hope at the same time. And I would just caution you to be careful what you might be walking away from. And then this final idea, and we've mentioned it earlier, let doubt drive you deeper. As we've been working through this series, Planted, I'm realizing that there's a paradox here, because the question I was asking at the beginning was, okay, how can we have a faith that's deep enough to handle disequilibrium? Or how can we have a faith that's deep enough to handle desolation? Or how can we have a faith that's deep enough to handle doubt? And what I'm realizing is God brings disequilibrium into my life to force me deeper, and He brings desolation into my life to force me deeper, and He may bring doubt into my life to force me deeper. And the very things that I worry will uproot me, God's willing to take and to deepen my roots, to dig me down and to get me planted. So church, here's what I'd say. To those of you who doubt a lot, or to have many doubts, you're welcome here. We're the company of the doubters, or at least we're question askers, because we sincerely want to know what the truth is. And I would say to any of you, God's not afraid of your questions. He's not afraid of our questions, if they're sincere. I would say this, don't disengage, stay planted, keep digging, because the roots that you are forming, even if you don't see them, they are deepening. And understand this, that the roots of faith grow deep in the forest of doubt. To those of you who doubt less, let's be a church where questions are safe. Let's be a church where we continue to ask questions, not to cause doubt, but to make sure that we are lining up with what truth is and what God says. Let's be a church where we continually strive for answers, but in a humble manner. Let's be a church of people who dig deeper. Let's grow deeper. Let's get planted with a faith that withstands doubt. And remember this. Doubt is the entry point to a deeper faith. Let's pray. God, I thank you for the faith that you give us. I'm also grateful for the fact that we have to live in doubt, and it's uncomfortable and I don't enjoy it. But I know it pushes me to a deeper faith. And we can look at this story of Jeremiah and we can relate to the questions that he asked, and maybe we have questions of our own. I do know that you have answers, and that in your wisdom you provide them. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. First question today is just maybe you're doubting what happens next. The next life, what's it's going to be like. Is there really such a thing as heaven? And you can even doubt if Jesus died for your sin, if that would make any difference if you invited him into your life. I can say from personal experience that, yeah, it will. And I would invite you to, in an act of faith, invite Christ into your life. You can do that where you sit this morning. Conversation between you and him. To confess your sin. To admit that Jesus is indeed Lord, died on a cross, rose again. Invite him into your story, into your life. Maybe you've crossed that line of faith already, but you have other faith or other doubts too. What is the doubt that you're wrestling with this morning? How can you use that doubt to help you dig deeper in your faith? Whether it's about God's plan, or whether it's about God's sovereignty, or whether it's just about God's goodness, how can he use that doubt in your life? Will you commit to digging deeper? And so, God, we want to be planted. We want to be able to withstand. We want to be able to withstand the doubts that come and have the assurance that we can trust you because you are trustworthy. Give us more faith, I'd pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Would you stand with me, please? We're going to continue next week. Pastor Mark will be back to speak, and he will be talking about how to stay planted when you face detours and delays in your life. Don't you wish that it was just a straight line and you could just do 70 the whole time? And it seems so many times in life things pop up and send us down side streets or stick us in traffic jams or things like that, but Pastor Mark's going to be talking about that as we continue our talk on Jeremiah. So God bless you. Have a great day. Invite somebody to come with you next week. Have a great week.